Welcome back to Void of Fears, where the line between nightmares and reality blurs with every story. Our community grows stronger with each brave soul who joins us. We're 8,000 deep now, creeping toward our goal of 10,000 subscribers by year's end. If you dare to continue this journey with us, hit that subscribe button now. Leave your mark with a like. Share your own encounters in the comments below. Now, let's begin today's story. Dr. James Harrington slammed his office door shut, the framed degrees on his wall rattling in protest. Another rejection email. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities had once again denied his request to conduct ground-penetrating radar surveys beneath the Sphinx. He ran his fingers through his greying hair and collapsed into his leather chair, the weight of his recent divorce and academic ridicule crushing down on him. For 15 years, he had dedicated his career to proving his theory that hidden chambers existed beneath the Great Sphinx. His colleagues had laughed behind his back at conferences. Journals had rejected his papers, and his department head had repeatedly warned him about pursuing fringe archaeology. The final blow had come 6 months ago when Catherine had finally had enough of his obsession and left him, taking their shared history of 20 years with her. James stared at the wall of his cramped university office, covered in satellite imagery of the Giza Plateau, geological surveys, and historical documents referencing anomalies beneath the ancient monument. He'd mortgaged his future on this theory, and now it seemed that future was crumbling, like the limestone of the Sphinx itself. He pulled out the worn journal his mentor had given him before passing away. Dr. William Foster, once a respected Egyptologist, until he too had become obsessed with what he called the true purpose of the Sphinx. The journal contained Foster's field notes from a clandestine excavation in 1978 that had uncovered unusual readings beneath the monument's right paw. Foster had died under mysterious circumstances in Cairo before he could pursue his findings further. "I'll never get approval now," James muttered to himself, pouring a generous measure of whiskey into his coffee mug. "Not after that editorial I published criticizing their handling of the new Grand Egyptian Museum." His phone rang. Unknown number. "Dr. Harrington speaking," he answered, his voice betraying his exhaustion. "Dr. Harrington, my name is Thomas Blackwood. I represent an organization that has taken great interest in your theories about chambers beneath the Sphinx." James sat up straight. "I'm listening." "We have connections within the Egyptian government. We can secure you the permits, and we're prepared to fully fund your expedition." "What's the catch?" James asked, suspicious of such a convenient miracle. "No catch, only that we receive exclusive access to document any findings. We believe what you might discover could change human history." James hesitated. The offer seemed too perfect, too precisely timed. "Your organization has a name, I presume?" "The Helios Foundation. We fund various archaeological endeavors that traditional academic channels consider premature. Your work caught our attention 3 years ago, after your presentation at the Cairo Archaeological Conference." James remembered that presentation. He'd been practically laughed out of the hall after suggesting that ground-penetrating radar had detected anomalies consistent with artificial chambers beneath the Sphinx. "Why now?" James pressed. "Political situations change, Doctor. The current administration in Egypt is more receptive to foreign research interests. This window may not remain open long." James glanced at Foster's journal, open to a page with a hand-drawn map of the Sphinx's base with red circles marking potential entry points. "I'll need full academic freedom, no interference with my methods or findings." "Of course," Blackwood said smoothly. "We merely observe and document. Your team, your expedition, your discovery. We'll need you to sign some standard confidentiality agreements, but those only restrict pre-publication publicity, not your academic publishing rights." "I'll need to select my own team," James added. "We anticipated that. We've taken the liberty of preparing a list of potential team members who already have the necessary security clearances for working at Giza. You'll find them all professionally qualified, but the final selections are yours. The following week, James found himself in the luxurious Cairo offices of the Helios Foundation, signing contracts and reviewing personnel files. Blackwood was a tall, thin man with prematurely silver hair and eyes so dark they appeared almost black. He moved with an unsettling grace and spoke with the precise diction of someone who had mastered many languages. "You understand, Dr. Harrington, that the Egyptian authorities have granted us a very specific window for this research," Blackwood explained as James reviewed the permits. 3 days on site, no extensions. 3 days isn't much time. It will be sufficient if your theories are correct. Our ground-penetrating radar has already confirmed a significant anomaly, precisely where you predicted. All that remains is to access it. James looked up sharply. "You've already conducted surveys." Blackwood smiled thinly. "Preliminary work only, to ensure we weren't wasting your valuable time." As James flipped through the personnel files, one caught his attention. Dr. Nasser Ibrahim, the ministry's own director of Giza Plateau Oversight. "A condition of our permit," Blackwood said. "He'll be observing on behalf of the Egyptian government." James continued reviewing the files. Dr. Rebecca Ellis, a geologist with cutting-edge expertise in subterranean imaging. Michael Thornton, a documentary filmmaker with impressive credentials and apparent connections to the Helios Foundation. And Amir Hassan, a local guide whose family had worked on archaeological digs around Giza for generations. "This all seems carefully orchestrated," James observed. "Efficiency, Dr. Harrington. When dealing with bureaucracies as complex as Egypt's, preparation is essential. Now, shall we proceed with the final arrangements? Your flight to Cairo leaves tomorrow evening." 3 weeks later, James stood in the shadow of the Great Sphinx, watching the sunrise paint the ancient monument in gold. The massive limestone figure had weathered thousands of years of desert storms, yet still maintained its enigmatic gaze across the Giza Plateau. Its body, the body of a lion, stretched out behind the human head, a silent guardian of secrets. James had always felt a peculiar connection to the Sphinx, even as a child when he'd first seen it in a documentary. Now, standing before it with the authority to probe its secrets, he felt a strange mixture of triumph and trepidation. The monument seemed to stare back at him with its time-worn face, neither welcoming nor forbidding, but watchful. The Giza Plateau was eerily quiet at this early hour. Tourist groups wouldn't arrive for several hours, and the Helios Foundation had arranged for their team to have exclusive access to the north side of the Sphinx, where the anomaly had been detected. A temporary barrier had been erected to shield their work from public view, with signs indicating conservation work in progress. The excavation equipment had arrived overnight. State-of-the-art ground-penetrating radar, sonic imaging devices, and minimally invasive excavation tools. Everything was draped in canvas covers, waiting for the team to begin their work. James walked slowly around the barrier, studying the weathered limestone of the Sphinx's pores. Controversy had raged for decades about the true age of the monument. The conventional archaeological position dated it to around 2500 BCE, built by Pharaoh Khafre, but some geologists, including those James had consulted, suggested that water erosion patterns indicated the Sphinx might be thousands of years older, perhaps dating back to 10,000 BCE or earlier. If true, it would completely rewrite the timeline of human civilization. He ran his hand along the rough stone, feeling the texture of ancient tool marks beneath his fingers. What were they trying to contain? He whispered. What were they so afraid of that they built a monument, this massive, to seal it away? "Magnificent, isn't it?" said a voice beside him. Dr. Rebecca Ellis emerged from her tent, the geological equipment slung over her shoulder. Her expertise with ground-penetrating radar was unmatched, and James had specifically requested her for this expedition. "It's hiding something," James replied. "I can feel it." "The data suggests you're right," Rebecca said. "Those voids we detected yesterday, they shouldn't be there. Not according to any conventional archaeological understanding." Their conversation was interrupted by Michael Thornton, the documentary filmmaker sent by their mysterious benefactors. His camera was already rolling, capturing the early morning light on the monument. "Could you two repeat that conversation? The lighting is perfect now," Michael asked. "This isn't a performance," James snapped. "We're making genuine discoveries here." "Discoveries that need to be documented properly," countered Michael. He was in his mid-30s with the weathered look of someone who'd filmed in harsh conditions around the world. His equipment was top of the line, far more sophisticated than typical documentary gear. "Your foundation seems very interested in high-quality documentation," Rebecca observed, eyeing the multiple camera setups Michael had arranged around their work area. Michael shrugged. "Helios doesn't do anything halfway. They want every moment captured, every discovery preserved from multiple angles. Think of it as creating the most comprehensive archaeological record possible." "And what exactly is Helios?" Rebecca asked. "I tried researching them before accepting this job. They seem to have appeared out of nowhere 5 years ago." "They're private philanthropists with a passion for archaeological mysteries," Michael replied, adjusting his camera settings. "Beyond that, I know as much as you do. They pay exceptionally well and provide the best equipment money can buy." "And they don't interfere?" James asked. Michael's expression was unreadable behind his sunglasses. "They observe, they record. Everything else is up to you, Doctor." Amir Hassan, their local guide, approached the group with Dr. Nasser Ibrahim, the Egyptian official assigned to monitor their activities. Amir's family had worked around the Giza Plateau for generations, and he knew the area better than any tourist guide. "Dr. Ibrahim has news," Amir announced. The official looked uncomfortable. "The ministry has approved your request to investigate the void beneath the right paw of the Sphinx. You have 3 days, no more." James could hardly contain his excitement. "That's all we need. Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim." "Don't thank me," Ibrahim said grimly. "I advised against this. There are reasons why we restrict access to certain areas. Old reasons." That night, as the team slept in their tents at the base camp near the Sphinx, each experienced vivid, disturbing dreams. James dreamt of stone passages descending into infinite darkness. Rebecca found herself trapped in a chamber where the walls breathed. Michael dreamed of filming shadowy figures, performing rituals around the Sphinx. Amir saw his ancestors, warning him in ancient Egyptian. And Dr. Ibrahim dreamed of a massive entity stirring beneath the sand. None shared their dreams with the others as they began their work the next morning. James awoke before dawn, drenched in sweat despite the cool desert night. In his dream, he had been walking down an endless staircase into darkness, each step taking him deeper beneath the earth. Voices had called to him from below, speaking in languages he almost understood. The most disturbing part had been the sense of recognition, as if he were returning to a place he had always known existed. He left his tent and walked toward the Sphinx, illuminated by floodlights they had set up for security. In the artificial light, the monument's expression seemed different, less peaceful, more vigilant. A guard nodded to him as he approached the security perimeter. "Could not sleep, Dr. Harrington." The guard was an older Egyptian man with a weathered face. "Strange dreams," James admitted. The guard nodded knowingly. "The Sphinx brings dreams. My grandfather was a guard here in the 1920s. He said, 'All who sleep in its shadow dream of what lies beneath.'" "And what did your grandfather say lies beneath?" James asked. The guard made a subtle gesture with his hand, a sign to ward off evil. He would not speak of it, only that the Ancient Ones built the Guardian for a purpose, and that purpose was not for glory or remembrance, but for protection. Protection from what? The guard only shook his head and resumed his patrol. At breakfast, James noticed the entire team seemed unusually quiet. Rebecca kept checking her geological instruments with nervous precision. Michael reviewed footage from the previous day, frowning at anomalies in the audio. Amir sat apart from the others, writing rapidly in his journal. Dr. Ibrahim arrived last, his normally immaculate appearance dishevelled, dark circles under his eyes. "Shall we begin?" James said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "We have limited time." The ground-penetrating radar confirmed a large, unnatural cavity beneath the right paw of the Sphinx. By midday, they had carefully removed enough sand and stone to reveal an anomaly. A seam in the bedrock that didn't match the natural limestone formation. "This is manufactured," Rebecca said, running her fingers along the perfectly straight line. "This is a door." James couldn't believe their luck. "This validates everything I've worked for." Dr. Ibrahim stepped forward, concern etched on his face. "We should consult with the ministry before proceeding." "We have authorization to investigate," James reminded him, "and we only have 3 days." Rebecca's equipment detected unusual readings from beyond the seam. "There's a cavity behind this," she confirmed, studying her tablet. "A large one. And the density readings are strange." "Strange how?" James asked. "The materials beyond this door don't match expected geological formations. There's something down there that's neither limestone nor bedrock." She adjusted her instruments. "And there's an energy signature I can't explain, a low-frequency resonance." Dr. Ibrahim moved closer, examining the seam with growing agitation. "This matches descriptions in certain restricted texts in our archives," he said quietly. "Texts that describe a sealed chamber beneath the Guardian." "You've seen references to this before?" James asked sharply. "Why wasn't this in any of the ministry's published research?" "Not everything is published, Dr. Harrington," Ibrahim replied. "Some knowledge is restricted for good reason." James felt a flash of anger. "Knowledge doesn't belong locked away in archives. If you knew about this—" "I knew of legends," Ibrahim interrupted. "Myths. Stories told among certain families who have served as guardians of the monuments for generations. Nothing I considered scientifically relevant until this moment." Michael filmed their exchange, zooming in on the seam in the stone. Through his viewfinder, he noticed something the others hadn't yet seen. Faint traces of pigment around the edges of the door. "There's paint here," he called out, or there was residual pigment. Amir carefully brushed the area Michael indicated, revealing traces of red ochre that had been applied to the stone thousands of years ago. "Blood," Amir said softly. "The symbols were painted in blood." As they carefully cleared more of the seam, ancient hieroglyphs became visible around its edges. Amir studied them intently, his expression growing troubled. "These aren't standard hieroglyphs. This is a dialect I've only seen in forbidden texts. Texts that were supposedly destroyed by the first pharaohs." "Can you translate them?" James asked. "Partially," Amir said. "It speaks of that which sleeps beneath the Guardian. And there's a warning, something about not disturbing its slumber." "Classic curse language," Michael said dismissively, filming the hieroglyphs. "Every tomb and temple has similar warnings." Dr. Ibrahim shook his head. "No, this is different." He pointed to specific symbols. "These refer to something that predates Egyptian civilization itself. Something they found and sealed away." Rebecca looked up from her instruments. "Whatever is behind this door, it's creating unusual readings. The temperature beyond is significantly lower than it should be, and there are magnetic anomalies I can't explain." "All the more reason to continue," James said firmly. By evening, they had discovered a mechanism within the door, a series of interlocking stone gears that seemed impossibly sophisticated for ancient construction. As they manipulated the final sequence, the temperature around them plummeted suddenly. Their equipment flickered, batteries draining inexplicably. The stone door receded, with a sound like a last exhale, revealing a descending stairway carved from a black stone unlike any Egyptian construction James had ever studied. The stairs spiraled down into darkness. "This material isn't limestone," Rebecca said, examining the black stone. "It's not basalt either. I'm not sure what it is." "Let's prepare to descend in the morning," James decided. "Full equipment, communications, everything." That night the dreams returned with greater intensity. James woke gasping at 3 a.m. The image of something vast and malevolent, reaching for him, still fresh in his mind. He left his tent and found Amir already outside, staring at the Sphinx. "You felt it too?" Amir asked, without turning. "The dreams?" "Yes. My great-grandfather was a guide for archaeologists in the 1920s, Amir said quietly. He told my grandfather about a secret expedition that found something beneath the Sphinx. Only one man returned, and he died babbling about the Ancient One awakening. The Egyptian government covered it up completely." "Why didn't you mention this before?" James asked. "Because I thought it was just a story," Amir replied. "Now I'm not so certain." The next morning, one of their Egyptian workers refused to enter the passage, claiming he had seen shadows moving within it during his night watch. Dr. Ibrahim tried to convince the team to wait for additional experts, but James was adamant about proceeding. "We have 2 days left," he reminded everyone. "This could be the most important archaeological discovery in history." Equipped with lights, cameras, recording devices, and communications equipment, the core team began their descent down the black stone stairway. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a metallic taste that coated their tongues. After descending for what seemed like far too long, given the known geology of the plateau, they encountered the first chamber. The walls were covered in carvings depicting humanoid figures, prostrating themselves before massive shapes, only partially shown in the reliefs. "These carvings don't match any known Egyptian artistic style," James noted, running his hand over the strange figures. "Because they're not Egyptian," Dr. Ibrahim said softly. "This predates the dynasties by thousands of years." As they moved deeper, they discovered the first bodies. Unlike traditional Egyptian mummies, these corpses were somehow preserved without wrappings or visible embalming. They lay in strange poses, their limbs contorted, their faces frozen in expressions of reverence or ecstasy. Most disturbing were the self-inflicted modifications, ritual scarification, and evidence of self-mutilation that formed patterns across their preserved skin. "My God," Rebecca whispered, "look at the preservation quality. These people died thousands of years ago, but the bodies haven't decomposed naturally." Michael filmed everything, but soon noticed problems with his equipment. "The footage is distorting whenever I point the camera at those symbols on the wall, and the audio has some kind of interference." They continued deeper, following the black stone corridor until it opened into a vast circular chamber. The ceiling arched high above them, carved with astronomical configurations that James immediately recognized as impossibly ancient. "These star patterns," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "They show alignments from more than 12,000 years ago, far older than any known Egyptian civilization." At the center of the chamber stood a massive altar of the same black stone, with channels carved into its surface leading to collection basins. The purpose was unmistakable. The altar had been designed for blood sacrifices on an industrial scale. "There are tool marks on the altar," Rebecca observed, leaning close to examine the surface, made by implements that shouldn't have existed in prehistoric times. As she reached out to touch one of the markings, her hand slipped on the smooth stone, and she cut her palm on a sharp edge. Blood welled from the wound, running along one of the channels in the altar's surface until it reached a carved symbol. The moment her blood touched the symbol, the temperature in the chamber dropped precipitously. Their breath clouded before them, and the lights flickered. "We need to leave," Dr. Ibrahim said urgently. "Now!" But as they turned to go, James noticed something new. A doorway on the far side of the chamber that he was certain hadn't been there before. "Wait," he said, "there's more to explore." "That doorway wasn't there before," Rebecca said, her voice trembling slightly. "I mapped this entire chamber when we entered. There was only one entrance." "Perhaps we overlooked it," Michael suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "No," Rebecca insisted. "I used laser mapping. It created a complete three-dimensional model of this room. That doorway was not there 5 minutes ago." James approached the new doorway cautiously. Unlike the black stone architecture surrounding them, this opening was bordered by what appeared to be a frame of dark, polished metal that gleamed dully in their flashlight beams. Symbols were etched into its surface, symbols that hurt the eyes when viewed directly. "This material," Rebecca said, scanning it with her instruments. "It's not registering as any known metal. The density is off the charts, but it's not responding to magnetic fields the way it should." Dr. Ibrahim began reciting something under his breath, a prayer or incantation in Arabic that sounded ancient. "What do the symbols say?" James asked Amir, who had been studying the ancient writings throughout their expedition. "I can't quite focus on them," Amir admitted, looking disturbed. "They seem to shift when I try to read them, but the overall pattern suggests an invitation." "An invitation?" Michael asked. "Yes, an invitation to enter, to commune." Amir's voice had taken on a strange quality, almost reverent. A cool breeze emanated from the doorway, carrying that same metallic taste they had noticed earlier, but stronger now. With it came a low, barely audible humming that seemed to vibrate not through the air, but through their bones. "We should document this and return to the surface," Rebecca suggested, her scientific demeanor visibly shaken. "We need more equipment, more personnel." "We don't have time," James countered. "Whatever this is, it's changing, evolving before our eyes. If we leave now, we might never get back in." Behind them, one of the chemical light sticks they placed around the chamber suddenly went out, then another. The darkness was encroaching, pushing their lit area smaller. "It wants us to go through," Amir said softly. "It's been waiting for so long." From that moment, the expedition began to unravel. Team members reported seeing shadows moving at the corners of their vision. Their radio connection to the surface became intermittent, filled with static and strange whispers. Michael's camera captured glimpses of movement in supposedly empty chambers when reviewed later. "Base camp, this is Harrington. Do you copy?" James spoke into his radio for the third time, receiving only bursts of static in response. "The signal was clear an hour ago," Rebecca said, checking her own radio. "We're not that deep." "It's not the depth," Dr. Ibrahim said ominously. "It's what surrounds us." They had decided to press forward through the new doorway, finding a corridor beyond that curved gently downward. The black stone walls were covered in carvings depicting scenes unlike any known Egyptian art. Figures with elongated limbs performing rituals around structures that resembled the Sphinx, but with subtle, disturbing differences. One carving showed the Sphinx with its mouth open, revealing row upon row of teeth. Another depicted it with its eyes wide open, staring at a spiraling shape in the sky. Most disturbing were the scenes showing human figures merging with the monument, their forms becoming part of the stone. Michael documented everything, though his cameras were behaving erratically. "The footage keeps developing these anomalies," he explained, showing James his viewfinder. The screen displayed visual glitches whenever it panned across certain symbols. "And listen to this." He played back audio recorded in the previous chamber. Beneath their recorded conversations was a subtle background noise, a rhythmic pattern that sounded almost like words spoken very slowly. "Could be equipment malfunctions from whatever energy field surrounds this place," Rebecca suggested, but her scientific explanation sounded hollow even to her own ears. As they continued deeper, they began to experience moments of disorientation. Time seemed to slip occasionally, James would check his watch, look away for what felt like seconds, then find that 20 minutes had passed. Rebecca would set down a piece of equipment and find it had moved several feet away when she turned back to it. Most disturbing were the visions that began to intrude on their perception. James caught glimpses of the corridor filling with robed figures who vanished when he turned to look directly at them. Rebecca heard whispers that sounded like her colleagues calling her name from side passages that weren't there when she investigated. Michael's camera batteries drained at an impossible rate, requiring constant replacement. When he reviewed his footage during breaks, he found frames that showed none of the team members present, though all had been in the shot during filming. Other frames showed additional figures standing among them, shadowy, indistinct forms that no one remembered seeing. Most disturbing were the hallucinations. Each team member began experiencing vivid waking nightmares tailored to their personal fears. Rebecca saw the walls closing in around her. Michael's camera viewfinder showed him things the others couldn't see. Dr. Ibrahim kept hearing voices speaking in ancient languages. As they pushed deeper, the architecture changed dramatically. The precision-carved black stone gave way to structures that seemed to defy conventional geometry. The walls appeared to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating spaces that felt larger than they should be. "This material," Rebecca said, analysing a sample she had taken, "it doesn't match any known element or compound, and it's cold to the touch, actively absorbing heat." They discovered writings in a language that caused splitting headaches when they attempted to decipher it. The symbols seemed to shift slightly when viewed peripherally, rearranging themselves when not directly observed. The structure extends far beyond what should be physically possible, given the geology of the Giza Plateau, Rebecca noted, consulting her instruments. "According to these readings, we're now below the water table, but everything's completely dry." During their exploration of these lower levels, they began to hear sounds, a slow rhythmic pulsation like the breathing of something massive. At first they attributed it to wind or their own stress perceptions, but the sound grew more distinct as they continued. "That's not geological," Rebecca whispered as they paused in a junction where 3 black stone corridors met. "That sound has a pattern to it. Listen, it's almost like a heartbeat, but much slower." They stood silent, focusing on the sound. It came in deep, resonant pulses that they could feel through the soles of their boots, approximately 1 pulse every 30 seconds. "Could be water movement," James suggested. "Underground rivers can create rhythmic pressure changes." "No water," Dr. Ibrahim said, his voice strained. "No natural process. This is breathing." "That's impossible," Michael said. "Nothing biological could be that large." "Who said anything about biological?" Rebecca asked, studying her instruments. "These readings suggest the entire structure around us is reactive, responsive to our presence." James pressed his hand against the wall, feeling a subtle vibration synchronizing with the deep pulses they were hearing. "The walls are warm," he noted with surprise. "Stone this deep should be cool." Rebecca confirmed with her thermometer. 52 degrees Celsius. That's well above ambient temperature for this depth." They continued forward, following the corridor that aligned with the direction of the pulses. The architecture around them became increasingly bizarre. Doorways appeared at impossible angles, some in the floor, some in the ceiling. Corridors branched off and seemed to loop back on themselves in ways that violated normal geometry. "I've lost all sense of direction," Rebecca admitted, checking her compass. "The needle is just spinning." "We've been walking downward consistently," James said. "We must be at least 100 meters beneath the Sphinx by now." "That's not possible," Dr. Ibrahim said. "The water table is only about 15 meters below the base of the Sphinx. We should be flooded." "Yet another impossibility," Michael muttered, filming the increasingly alien architecture around them. The pulsing grew louder as they continued, now accompanied by a subtle harmonic. a deep, resonant tone at the edge of human hearing that they felt more than heard. It created a sensation of pressure in their ears and behind their eyes. While examining one particularly ornate chamber, Amir became separated from the group. When they found him 20 minutes later, he was standing motionless, staring at a wall covered in shifting symbols, speaking fluently in a language none of them recognized. It took several minutes to break him from his trance-like state, and afterward, he had no memory of what had happened. "Something was speaking through me," he said, trembling. "Something old. Something that's been waiting." In what they came to call the archive chamber, they discovered preserved texts in various ancient languages, some recognizable as proto-forms of Sumerian and early Egyptian, others completely unknown. Dr. Ibrahim was able to partially translate sections describing an entity that had been imprisoned beneath the Sphinx. "According to this," he said, his voice hushed, "there were civilizations before any we know of. Advanced civilizations that were destroyed after they awakened the sleeper beneath. The Sphinx wasn't built as a monument, it was built as a seal, a lock on a door." James realized with growing horror that the hieroglyphs they had initially discovered weren't warnings, but rather components of a containment spell, one they had broken when they opened the door. Their worst fears were confirmed when they discovered the remains of another expedition, modern equipment and decomposing bodies that couldn't be more than a few decades old. According to official records, no authorized expedition had been permitted to excavate beneath the Sphinx in the modern era. "Someone else found this place," James said, examining the weathered equipment, "and they didn't make it out." As they attempted to retrace their steps to the surface, the entity began to reveal itself. It started subtly, shadow-like tendrils, emerging from walls, retreating when directly observed. The air became thick and difficult to breathe, carrying whispers at the edge of hearing. Each team member experienced the entity differently. James saw it as a void taking human shape. Rebecca perceived it as something vast with countless limbs. Michael's camera captured only distortions in the air. Amir saw something like a pharaoh with the head of an impossible creature. Dr. Ibrahim, who had been growing increasingly agitated, suddenly stepped forward when the manifestations began, his expression oddly serene. "I understand now," he said calmly. "My family has been guarding this secret for generations. I am meant to serve." Before anyone could stop him, he walked directly into a wall of shadows which enveloped him completely. His scream cut off abruptly, leaving only silence. The entity, now partially manifested, began communicating telepathically with the remaining team members. It offered knowledge, secrets of the universe, lost technologies, power beyond imagining, in exchange for its freedom. In James's mind, a voice like grinding stone spoke. "I have waited longer than your species has existed. I have seen civilizations rise and fall. Free me, and I will share their secrets with you." The visions it placed in their minds were simultaneously glorious and terrifying. Glimpses of technologies that could transform humanity, but also images of worlds consumed and civilizations destroyed. The team realized with growing horror that they hadn't been exploring the structure. They had been deliberately led deeper by the entity's influence. The passages had rearranged themselves behind them, creating an ever-shifting labyrinth designed to prevent their escape. When Michael reviewed his footage, he discovered that the entity had been present in every frame since they entered the structure, subtly influencing their decisions, leading them precisely where it wanted them to go. "It's been guiding us from the beginning," Michael said, showing them the footage. "Look, every time we made a decision about which way to go, there's a shadow directing our attention." Physical laws began to break down around them. Gravity shifted unpredictably. At times they found themselves walking on walls or ceilings without falling. Time dilated strangely. Rebecca's watch showed that they had been underground for 6 days, though it felt like only hours had passed. James, drawing on his extensive knowledge of ancient languages and symbols, began to understand the true purpose of the Sphinx and the chamber beneath it. The Sphinx wasn't built by the Egyptians, he explained as they huddled together in what they hoped was a path leading upward. It was built by a previous civilization, perhaps multiple civilizations working together to contain something they couldn't destroy. The lion body, the human head, it's a hybrid designed to seal a hybrid entity. How do we stop it? Rebecca asked, gripping her geological hammer like a weapon. The containment was based on symbols, the hieroglyphs we broke when we opened the door, James said. We need to restore them, recreate the seal. But Amir, who had become increasingly distant and strange since his trance, now stood with his eyes reflecting the darkness around them. Why would we seal away such knowledge? He asked, his voice overlaid with something ancient. It can give us everything. It can make us gods. That's not you talking, Amir, James said firmly. Fight it. Michael, reviewing more footage, made a devastating discovery. Look at these images from previous archaeological expeditions to the Sphinx, he said, showing them photos on his camera. These symbols on the paw, they're the same in every photo except the ones taken just before our expedition. Someone deliberately defaced the containment symbols to allow us to open the door. Blackwood, James realized. Our mysterious benefactor wanted this to happen. As the entity's manifestation grew stronger, James came to understand the final, terrible truth. The containment spell required not just symbols, but a conscious guardian, a living mind, to maintain the seal. For thousands of years, different individuals had taken on this burden, becoming one with the Sphinx, their consciousness, the lock on the door. Someone needs to stay, he said quietly. Someone needs to become the new guardian. Rebecca shook her head. There has to be another way. There isn't, James replied, and it has to be me. I'm the one who led us here. I'm the one who opened the door. The entity, sensing their plan, intensified its assault. The passages around them began to collapse. The air itself seemed to solidify, making movement difficult. Amir, now fully under its influence, tried to stop them from reaching the original chamber. Michael restrained Amir, while Rebecca and James made their way back to the first doorway with its broken symbols. Using his knowledge of the ancient texts and Rebecca's blood, which the entity had already recognized as a component of the spell, James began reconstructing the containment symbols. As he worked, the entity's promises grew more desperate, showing him visions of fame, of academic vindication, of reunion with his ex-wife. When these failed, it showed him visions of horror. What would happen to the world if it escaped? Go, James told Rebecca and Michael, as the chamber began to shake violently around them. Take Amir and get to the surface. Whatever happens, make sure this place remains sealed. James, Rebecca began. Go, he shouted as parts of the ceiling began to collapse. Rebecca and Michael dragged the semi-conscious Amir up the stairway as James completed the symbols. The entity, now materializing as a mass of darkness shot through with points of terrible light, surged towards him. James stood firm, completing the final symbol with his own blood. As the entity reached him, he spoke the words he had discovered in the archive chamber. Words of binding, of containment, of sacrifice. A blinding light erupted from the completed symbols, engulfing both James and the entity. The last thing Rebecca saw as she looked back was James's silhouette, arms outstretched, becoming one with the light as the passage sealed itself behind them. Rebecca, Michael, and Amir emerged from beneath the Sphinx into the harsh daylight of the Giza Plateau. To their shock, the excavation site had been rapidly filled in, all evidence of their dig erased. Egyptian security forces surrounded them immediately, confiscating their equipment and samples. In the days that followed, they discovered that no official record of their expedition existed, The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities denied authorizing any excavation beneath the Sphinx. Their mysterious benefactor, Thomas Blackwood, seemed never to have existed. The university that had employed James Harrington had no record of his research into chambers beneath the Sphinx. Most disturbing of all, the physical evidence they had collected began to degrade inexplicably. Michael's footage became corrupted, showing only static where the underground chambers had been. The samples Rebecca had collected crumbled to ordinary dust. Their photographs faded to blank paper. Only one piece of evidence remained: the cut on Rebecca's palm, which had now healed into a pattern matching one of the ancient symbols from the containment spell. A month after their return, Rebecca began researching other ancient monuments around the world: the pyramids of Bosnia, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the Nazca lines in Peru, suspecting they too might be seals containing similar entities. Michael abandoned documentary filmmaking, troubled by fragmented memories of what his camera had recorded beneath the Sphinx. Amir disappeared completely after returning to Cairo, and halfway across the world, Catherine Harrington, James's ex-wife, woke from another vivid dream in which her former husband called to her from beneath the sands of Egypt, begging not for rescue, but for her to keep others away, to ensure the Guardian remained undisturbed. In her dream, something spoke through James's mouth. "I am the seal. I am the lock. I am the Guardian between worlds. And I am not alone." She woke with a start, her heart racing. For a moment, she could still hear James's voice, not as it had been during their marriage, but deeper, resonant with something ancient and terrible. Before she could reach for her phone to call someone, anyone, the memory of the dream began to fade like water soaking into sand, leaving only fragments and a deep, inexplicable dread. Catherine Harrington sat up in bed, trying to calm her breathing. She'd had dreams about James before, after their divorce. Sad dreams, angry dreams, occasionally even reconciliation dreams, but nothing like this. Nothing that left her with such a profound sense of wrongness. On her nightstand, her laptop screen glowed, though she was certain she'd shut it down before bed. She leaned closer and saw an email composition window open, addressed to expedition@heliosfoundation.org, with the subject line Sphinx Acoustic Anomaly Research Team Application. The body of the email was complete, including her credentials, experience, and specific interest in the Sphinx project. All that remained was to click send. Catherine didn't remember writing this email. She had no interest in Egyptian archaeology. Her field was cultural anthropology, with a focus on indigenous South American tribes. Yet, as she stared at the screen, her finger moved toward the trackpad almost of its own volition. Something was calling her to Egypt, something that wore her ex-husband's face in her dreams. Something that was not alone. Her finger hovered over the trackpad, and from thousands of miles away, beneath the ancient gaze of the Sphinx, something waited for her decision. As she woke, she found her computer open to an email she didn't remember writing, an application to join a new international expedition being formed to investigate unusual acoustic anomalies recently detected beneath the Great Sphinx of Giza.